right, hello again. So I'm Leia. I am the content producer for Farmer's Footprint. And like I mentioned, this is our third Farmside Chat, and we're so excited to have Amanda Harris with us today. So Amanda, you want to just wave and say hi?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Yeah. So I have the pleasure of meeting Amanda in Mexico, where she resides. She's been there for 2 years. And if you haven't read her blog post yet, it's in the chat. I just sent it. We just posted it this morning, but highly encourage you diving deep into Amanda's story. It's fascinating of just hearing her background and how she ended up working on the grounds in Mexico, doing amazing work. So we'll dive into all of that, but just a bit of housekeeping before. I wanted to introduce Tori, our amazing director of community. So Tori, a little wave to us.
Hey guys, welcome. Thanks for coming today.
I'm sure you've all interacted or seen Tori. So she's our, go-to person for anything around Farmers Footprint, connecting our team with the community and what your needs or inspirations are or activations are. So we're so grateful, Tori, for you to be hosting us today. So yeah, we're gonna just kind of run of show. We're gonna introduce Amanda and jump a bit into her story. Tori will guide us through a few questions, and then we're gonna open it up to all of you guys. We really want these farmside chats to be an intimate conversation with our farmers, where you can ask face to face, screen to screen, and hear any questions you have for Amanda. There's no silly questions. Everything's welcome. This is a very open, casual space. So we really encourage you to ask questions personally. So everyone is muted now. But when we open the Q&A, you can do the raise hand function. So you'll go on your screen to participants, and there's the little raise hand option. You'll click on that, and then we'll call you, and you'll have the ability to unmute yourself. If you're feeling shy today, which we all have those days, you can type in your question in the chat, but highly encourage you to turn your video on and just ask directly to Amanda. So anyways, without further ado, very excited to really let Amanda share her story and speak. But if you haven't read her blog, I'll just give a brief intro of her background. Amanda studied government, politics, and criminal justice reform in Washington, D.C. And now through, many life experiences and places around the world, ended up in Mexico, Juluchuca, Mexico, mainland Mexico, and is stewarding the land of a resort called Playa Viva, which is beautiful, that's really focused around regeneration. So from everything from their building structures to their involvement with the local community to their farming. And Amanda is leading amazing initiatives on the reforestation regeneration side of the land on over 200 acres, working really with the locals. So she has such a grace with her when you see her in her element there. It's a very collaborative environment, and she's constantly learning from even the grandmothers of her workers and sharing, these farming principles. So anyways, I'm gonna hand it over to Amanda, and I'd really love to just start on that topic of, your background in law and politics and criminal justice reform, and how you ended up working in the grounds in the field in Mexico, and how it all kind of ties together.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Leia, for that lovely introduction. And thank you, Tori and Farmers Footprint, for everything you guys are doing. I feel honored to be part of this conversation and part of the network that you guys are creating. I also want to offer a big thanks to everyone who's on the call and participating. I'm eager to hear your questions and tell you a little bit about my story, and see how kind of together we can continue with the regenerative agriculture movement kind of in the United States and Mexico, and make that border a little bit more fluid. So as Leia mentioned, my background is in criminal justice reform. I studied global environmental politics, as well as kind of the governing bodies around the movement of natural resources between the United States and Latin American countries. Specifically when 10, 15 years ago, when I was in my undergraduate degrees, my work was really around helping underserved and under-resourced communities inside the United States, inside some of the most kind of underserved cities and towns around the Washington, D.C. area, gain access to resources, whether that be government projects, government funding, or kind of this blend of public-private partnership inside the ways that private businesses could also help inside those communities. So for several years, I worked in law, in the legal field. I was kind of on a track of thinking really big picture and how could I help shape policies inside the United States that helped individuals, helped communities, like at-risk communities in general, and try to see like a brighter future for some of those individuals in those spaces. I worked for several years inside a law firm that worked on criminal justice reform. Meanwhile, during that experience, I was kind of exposed to the importance of the food that we consume, and how oftentimes in these same communities that I was working with, kind of how they didn't have access to some of the resources, like the food resources and the healthy foods that I ultimately kind of shape the humans that we become. I mean, we are what we eat. And what I was noticing was that there was just a really like a lack of access to some of the healthy choices that people were being told to make that would help improve their livelihoods, that would keep them out of prison or jail or some of the negative tracks that they were on. So inside the law firm that I was working at, I was kind of making, and I was stepping outside of my role necessarily, and making a lot of like environmental changes inside the work that we were doing. We turned the business onto solar panels. We started having different fundraising projects at the law firm that supported the community where we existed. And along those kind of 3 or 4 year trajectory, I just identified with the individuals that I was meeting. And I realized that the career path that I was thinking of, writing policy, of working inside Washington, D.C., kind of lobbying for change at that level, wasn't necessarily where my skill set and my interest lied. I wanted to, what meant the most to me was kind of similar to these conversations that we're having today, this opportunity to connect with humans on a one-to-one basis, to really get to know folks, to spend time to learn their story, and to help them help themselves is kind of the way I look at the work that I do nowadays. And so a lot of that was shaped around just kind of recognizing that I wanted to have a little bit more tighter connection and a more personalized relationship with both farmers and folks in that community at that time. I guess from there, as I decided to make this transition outside of law, I had a friend in Washington, D.C. that was starting an environmental organization. And what he was planning to do was kind of a lot of the same work that I had done with the law firm. He wanted to connect businesses to new communities. He wanted to connect new individuals to businesses making the right decisions. And so I took this really big risk. My parents still think it was a huge risk, to step away from a career path that I had defined for myself, this trajectory that I was on, and to take a job that was not going to financially sustain me. It was actually just kind of volunteer work for a year to help a friend get their business off the ground. And in that experience, I realized that more of like a farming and getting back to the land, touching the soil, working side by side with individuals was a path that really was going to shape my future and allow me to to like use the experience that I had been gaining to support other individuals. So I worked with that program for about a year in Washington, D.C. We built a network of 230,000 individuals in the city, along with about 60 green businesses. And eventually we're able to sell that business model to a national organization inside the United States. At that time, I had been making relationships with a professor that I was very interested in her work in Western China and in Southeast Asia. She had a large network of folks there. And from what I had understood about farming, there were some traditional experiences and traditional practices inside Asia that I really wanted to get to know. So I went to Asia for about a year. I lived and worked among different communities as far north as like the Himalayas of Nepal, and was learning techniques and the way that they used and upcycled resources to really solve their own problems, solve some of the same problems I had seen in Washington, D.C., where the government's resources weren't reaching some of the deepest corners and what could be categorized as kind of forgotten communities. So it was really when I was in Asia, between Nepal, Burma, and Western China, where I was exposed to some of the concepts of permaculture and kind of what that looks like. And so permaculture, I don't know if you've all heard of it, but I'll mention it. Permaculture is it's a land use and like community building movement. It strives towards like this harmonious integration of human dwellings, of communities, of individuals, of microclimates, depending on where you live, what ecosystem you're in. Obviously annual plants and perennial plants and animals and soils and the water and all of the elements that go into that. But the focus isn't necessarily on each of those elements individually. It's more about how we put those elements into a system or into an ecosystem, and what relationships are created from each of those things. So that could be humans, individuals inside of a town, or estuary systems and new lagoons, to food production, reforestation, or animal husbandry. I was in Asia for a year, as I mentioned, working with a handful of different organizations. It was around that time that I applied to graduate school. Some of my graduate school classmates are on the call. I'm actually at their house right now, so I appreciate you guys being here. And that's where I studied global environmental politics and natural resource development, natural resource management. I was blessed with the opportunity to really study on the ground in the field at the Universidad para la Paz in Costa Rica. That's where I was exposed to Spanish. Thought I spoke Spanish 2 years ago. Quickly learned I didn't. And really got the opportunity to work side by side with women's cooperatives trying to build like chicken coops and ecological animal husbandry systems in Costa Rica. I worked closely with like disaster risk reduction strategies in partnership with the Costa Rican government. And that was one of the first real like tangible times that I saw how a government and how private business can come together using regenerative design, ecological design to solve really, really pressing problems. In that case, we were looking at landslides and how they were affecting the home, like destroying homes and affecting the lives of a community, a very at-risk community. It was around then that I had a draw to Latin America that hasn't been broken since. I think I've spent the last 6 years living and working in communities in northern Brazil, in Guatemala and Nicaragua. And as the ladies mentioned, now I have 2 years under my belt in Mexico. Feel like I'm just starting to get a real understanding of the community there, which is really one of the founding principles of permaculture. It recommends that you observe and interact for as long as you can, but at least a year before making any real decisions or implementing design in a new space, in a new ecosystem. And when I mention ecosystem, I talk not only about the land-based work that I do, but about the individuals that live and work and exist in that community before I get there, but long after I'll be there, and before kind of private business and private equity starts coming into those communities that are oftentimes really stable in themselves, just can thrive even more, I would say, once they're exposed to or given access to resources that they don't always have prior.
I love that, Amanda. Just to kind of jump in, because I think what we've noticed time and time again, and what you drew really beautifully to, is that element of surprise within taking your own lens into a brand new space. So I felt threads of that through your story of, you know, your work or your studies in your undergraduate, and how that took you on this trajectory roundabout to your graduate work that took you roundabout to Latin America. And then all of those lenses added up put you in the perfect space to just observe for 1 to 2 years. So I just find that to be really, really beautiful. And I'm curious, because I feel like we've arrived at the present, and it sounds like there's so much work to be done within that community. What's forward look like? What is the future vision, and what are your plans?
Oh, there's so many. So yeah, just to kind of touch on the surprise element there. For those of you on the call and folks that you work with and in whatever communities you work with, you know, people often ask or like comment on the opportunities that I have in Mexico. And sometimes when I'm laying in bed at night and thinking about kind of, how did I get here? Like, what happened? It's a story I told myself once I started getting to know different communities and people around the world and cultures and practices, that I was just kind of wrote a story in my head that I wanted to participate in, and kind of like, and sometimes I think that I just manifested the reality that I live in. So I encourage each of you to be manifesting those opportunities and see what comes of them, and take the roads that are a little bit challenging or a little bit that make you nervous, kind of like this call for me, and take the risk and get to know people. Like I know we live in a world right now where we're wearing masks and we're a little bit nervous to connect and collaborate and really be side by side with one another. But when those walls come down and those barriers are relaxed a little bit, really get to know your neighbor and the folks that you can. That is how I'm able to decide what work to do in the community where I now live. So this observe and interact principle really meant for me kind of passing time in Juluchuca. I'm a doer, and I like to move things along. I like to really be working with my hands and see progress. But one thing I've learned over the past several years, and more so in Juluchuca than anywhere else, is that the growth and the learning and the understanding and that connection is in the process. And it's not ever in our final product. By the time we've harvested the food or we've planted the tree, we've learned from one another. We've connected with grandmothers or abuelos y abuelitos in the town, and we've studied the water. We've studied the ecosystem, the elements, and how they move across our landscape, not only just at one point, but at the several seasons or varying seasons in the year. So some of the biggest work that we've done in the last 2 years, and work that will continue, to answer your question, Tori, is one of our core values at Playa Viva is like waste stream management. It's reducing waste, not only in our hotel, which is a small little 12-room boutique hotel on the beach, but also supporting the community, and the folks that work at our hotel are part of the community. There's about 600 people in the town of Juluchuca. 10% of them work with our hotel. And so we have very frank conversations around trash, around recycling, around waste, around the burning of organic material. excuse me, and around capturing and storing energy, another really important permaculture principle. One of those things, one of the ways that we've seen the most success, we wanted to start a recycling program in town. And so there's a concept called a banana circle. It's one of my favorite permaculture designs. It's super simple, works really well in California for those of you who are there, but is adaptable to any climate. You dig like a pit. It's essentially just like a 6 foot wide by 6 foot deep pit. You could really modify that to any size. You take the soil out, and instead of, in our community, many folks are under the assumption that by having organic material in their yard, it attracts risks and insects and scorpions and snakes. So what we do is we capture that organic material. It goes into the banana circle. It's often sits right outside of what's called a pila, or where folks in our community wash their clothes, wash their dishes, wash their body in stored water that they have. And that water often runs off, creating a few like global health issues. There's stagnant water, which causes bacteria. There's mosquito-borne illnesses are pretty prevalent where we live. And so by funneling that water using upcycled materials, just a few feet or meters of tubing, you can turn two major problems: this water, which causes health risks, and the burning of organic material, which additionally causes health risks. Put those two things in the center of that pit, and around the edge of the pit, you plant bananas, hence the name, or papayas, or any like heavy feeders in agriculture. And so by installing these banana circles in town, we do it kind of as our permaculture team. I do it as part of another government funded initiative that we work with. We're able to take two really big problems for community members and turn it into abundance, or turn it into a nutrient dense food crop that comes right off of their land. So we started installing these banana circles about 12, 13 months ago. To date, there's 8 in town. We do about 1 a month. And the first 6 are already producing food. Families have taken bananas and papayas and tomatoes and different herbs off of them. And through that work, it's allowed us to have bigger conversations around waste and around recycling. And so if you meet certain goals, if you're like meeting certain initiatives in that program, you earn a recycling bin, or you earn a trash bin. And then there's a volunteer program associated with our hotel where then there's workshops run. And we've seen in the past 12 months, our town has collected, in conjunction with these projects, we use metric tons, but over 4 metric tons of recyclable material, which in our community turns into actual pesos or money. It's something that they are then able to sell. We've seen this it started with 2 young guys managing the program. And as soon as there was revenue and income from it, they turned to us and said that they were expanding their team. They wanted to use that money to convince 2 other friends to join. And they were convinced that with more hands, they could do more work, they could have a bigger impact, and they would be helping 2 other kids who are kind of at financial risk. So that's kind of an example of why we move slowly, why we observe and interact for a long time. I could have appeared in Juluchuca and tossed out the banana circle idea from day one, but it had a lot more momentum and a lot more traction when I got to know individual families, when I went and had dinner or made really not round tortillas with different families, and kind of put myself out there, spent a year and 2 years even getting to know them, so that when I do present an idea to my community members, something that I've seen time and again succeed, there's like a level of trust and a level of trust and relationship there that allows people to take a risk a bit more freely, or not such a scary experience. The biggest project that we're working on right now there's a video attached to the blog post if you get a chance to read it, or I think it's at least linked. I work a lot in rainwater catchment, and where I live in Juluchuca, where we live, it's the rainy season there is changing drastically. It used to rain 6-7 months out of the year. Now we unfortunately receive maybe 4 big rain events a year over the course of about 3 months. For our rivers, that's a good thing. It's not a horrible thing. They still are receiving the same amount of water. Unfortunately, though, for our hillsides, for the homes at the bottom of several of the hills, that amount of water in a really dry climate doesn't allow our soil, doesn't allow our ecosystem to actually absorb it. So if what we're looking to do this year, beginning now, ideally, but really having it done by early April, mid-April, is install 10 rainwater catchment systems in 10 homes. As I mentioned with those young guys in the recycling program, the community is really, really good at identifying who the families are in the most need. So it's not something that I personally have to do. I find kind of some leaders or thought leaders in the community who I know will buy into the project, and they identify the families that we'll work with. And so those 10 families have been chosen. We've done some design analysis on each of the homes. We will, each system is a little bit different. Some are using upcycled materials, some are using new materials that we'll have to purchase, but we'll be putting in about 3 kilometers of gutters over the course of the 10 homes. And then each home will receive a 15,000 liter, I don't know what that is in gallons, sorry, a 15,000 liter cistern made out of ferro cement, which is kind of the most regenerative resource we have available to us for this style construction. And that, I think my favorite part of the whole thing is we're going to actually paint each of these cisterns with kind of an educational mural, like an educational component, so that there's something not only functional, but really beautiful and educational inside the community, so that kids and adults alike can kind of see this comic strip of the water cycle and just understand kind of why that system is in place. But the reason this came about is because last year in dry season, I noticed these trucks just driving back and forth to homes with what are called tinacos, these like 1,000-liter tanks in the back of them. And so I observed it, I got chatting with a few people and realized that an average family in the town where we live for the rainy season, which is now 7 to 9 months long, carry water, literally carry water 10 hours a week to their home. So that's 40 to 50 hours a month. Most folks in our community, if they have a job, make about $10 a day on the higher end of things. And that money supports anywhere from 4 to 10 people in the household. So to be able to gain those 45 hours back in a week or in a month, excuse me, that's kind of where my conversation stemmed with folks. Like, what would you do with that time? How would you use that time differently? What would you be planting more? Would you be with your kids? And it was a range of answers, but the excitement on these families' faces to not do that physical labor, not put the wear and tear on their vehicle or borrow a vehicle, and to not have to worry on a day-to-day basis whether there's water to do just live. It's really just for kind of washing clothes and bathing and occasionally drinking. Opened a door for me. It was kind of like, okay, we have to solve this problem for as many of these folks as we can. So that's really where the design came in. That's where the hope is to kind of open up some of those hours for folks, and give them the opportunity to spend that how they want. Ideally, by capturing a large amount of that falling rain, of that water that comes down, we'll be able to kind of observe some of those impacts in the most, in the target communities, and see kind of what our next steps are from there. Another permaculture's principle is slow and small solutions. So last year we installed this system on my farm. We are now stepping into the community, And the question will be, do we go from 10 homes to 100 homes, or do we go from 10 homes to the next phase? Are there swales and estuaries that we start to reestablish, or how do we focus on this resource and try to put water back into our soils to be able to support additional harvests, additional food resources for people, or kind of just the basic needs of living. There's a lot more projects. I can keep going if you want.
Wow, I'm floored. I am incredibly amazed. I had a peek at your GoFundMe, but just to hear it really talked about in that true essence of, I think, everyone's most finite resource in this world, in this life, is time. So really it's the gift of water, but also like you're getting your life back. And that is what is elegant solution to you observing these rainwater tanks. I'm really, really inspired by that. So I'd love to open it up. I imagine that everyone is feeling about the same, and also hopefully a little curious. So if anyone would like to drop their question in the chat, or preferably if you're feeling brave or really excited to ask Amanda directly, you can go to participants and then raise hand. It'll pop a little blue hand up, and then we can request you to unmute. Then you can shout your question out to Amanda, or ask it in a normal voice. And if not, if we're feeling shy, I just have endless questions for you, Amanda. So, and if not, I can start asking people that I know to hop in.
I know a few faces on there too. I'll call on folks if you need me to.
Okay, we've got Stephanie. Cool. What's going on?
Hi, sorry, I couldn't find where to raise my hand in the participant section. Hi, thank you so much for sharing your story. I feel like I have a sort of similar trajectory. And right now, I actually came to this chat because I've built a couple of banana circles and I'm kind of obsessed with them. I've done a couple, and I'm in California now. I've done a couple in like Latin America, and I'm in California now, and interested in doing some banana circles down here in Long Beach area. And I kind of have a technical question about the banana circles, because when I've previously done them, I felt like it's best to have two. So you're always filling one and then you're like moving to another one once that one is full. So that you're like letting the compost actually come to fruition without adding new organic material. And just curious to know like how you manage that. Or if the compost as a product isn't really the point, so you're not that concerned with that anyway.
Good question, Stephanie. I'm glad to hear that you've been building banana circles. They're one of my favorite.
Me too.
I guess I have a couple thoughts on it, but so for me, another permaculture principle is stacking functions, or like take a harvest. There should always be multiple yields coming out of the work that you do. So the compost that's produced isn't necessarily something that I normally take out of the banana circle. And I imagine you don't either, but it's the plants around it that are really feeding on it. And that's how, because there's no other compost, organic material, or like nutrients that really need to go into the system. Mm-hmm. So I'd say maybe plant it a little bit denser. They'll consume that compost faster. I've never put two circles together, like side by side, but it could absolutely be done, and there's no reason not to do it. Two things. One of the things that I've noticed as the most success in my banana circles in the circles that I've built, is I always start with cardboard at the very, very bottom. Mm-hmm. It's like worms feed on it. It really calls a lot of the decomposers to the system. Another really important part would be to go into the forest near where you are and find mycelium. So like underneath of leaf litter, kind of at the root of, like at the base of a tree, find those like that like patty of white like hairs, and put that in the banana circle early on as well. And maybe even every couple layers if you want. And that'll really get the breakdown to happen a little bit faster. The one that I use on the farm now, the circle that we're planting in and harvesting from, we put a fair amount of coconut, like the outside of a coconut, not the little part that we get in the United States, but that big old part that's full of organic material. I add like 400 to 500 of those a week. And it blows my mind that my pit doesn't fill up. Some days I leave for the weekend and it's like a half a meter, like 2 feet off the ground. And we come back and it's shrunk. Every weekend it shrinks. And so I haven't seen the problem of having too much organic material in the system in the past. But I would say a second circle to the side of it would be really helpful if that's an issue you're running into.
Okay, cool. I just have a really quick follow-up question then. So before, when you were saying that, you were working with a team of 2 people, and then they saw that, the waste management programs that you guys had put in place became profitable, and they expanded their team. Was that just a recycling system, like the actual recycling of the plastics and the glass bottles itself, or were there other products? Because in that moment, I understood that they were pulling compost from the banana circles.
Yeah. No, sorry. Yep, it's plastic. Well, where we live, there's not a lot that can be recycled, unfortunately. So they're making money off plastic, and then they actually, sell glass bottles back to me on the farm that then I use to sell farm products like moringa powder or coconut oil, to some small markets that we work within.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you.
Sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephanie. I'd love to connect with you too, because I'm based down here in SoCal. We should chat. We'll have an aside. I'm going to pass the mic to Leia as well, because she has a question for Carlos, who I think has a question. Team Carlos.
Well, I just see Team Carlos over here. They are some good friends who introduced me to Amanda. And so they have a question, but they're on the grounds in Mexico doing a lot of great community work there. So I just wanted to call on them to ask their question.
Well, it was me that had the question. Amanda, I've learned so much from you in the short time I've known you. I'm lucky enough to have visited your farm and seen it firsthand, and it's so beautiful. And I've seen it over the years progress as well, which has been so cool. And I just wanted to know what it's like for you farming so close to the coast and so close to the ocean, and what maybe some challenges that you've had versus, because you've farmed in quite a few places all over the world. I'm just curious what maybe some challenges you might have, and some opportunities or some really surprising things that may have come from being close to the ocean, and how those ecosystems can diverse.
Thanks, Lex, and the Carlos team and everybody there. Thanks also for spending time on my farm over the years, Lex. I appreciate you. There's a couple answers. I guess one of the, there's a really funny story. When I first got to Playa Viva, the farm team, I think they kind of like wanted to see how much I knew. And they were like, oh, you're an expert? Like, come here, we have this pest. Can you help us with this pest that eats our lettuce? And I was like, yeah, I got pests under control. What do we have? And they were like, well, look, the garden beds closest to the beach, these crabs come up from under the sand and they start eating the plants. And I was just like, oh my goodness, where am I? Like, I have never dealt with crabs as my my main pest of like food production before. Did a little bit of research. Again, permaculture is always thinking about multiple harvests. So we used some trash, built some traps, baited the crabs, and now we get lettuce and little jaibas, they're called, and make a really awesome soup with the blend of those 2 harvests. So oftentimes the problem can become the solution. That's another kind of like catchphrase in permaculture that I really connect to. Like ecologically, land-based speaking, some of my biggest issues that I have faced on Playa Viva's 200 acres and working with some of the farmers nearby is that our water is incredibly salty, which just closes the kind of passageways inside plants to be able to absorb nutrients. My focus in agriculture is on nutrient-dense crops. So that, fortunately, I have that background and I understand kind of what smaller magnesiums and calciums, which elements needed to be added to the soil to kind of bring it back into balance with salt. I don't know if you face some of those same problems in California for those of you who are on the call from there, but there's a lot of good resources with the NRSDC to address some of those. We also have incredibly sandy soil, but as many of you probably know, really the root of regenerative agriculture is in building soil. I really tell the guys that we work with that we're farming soil. And so that goes back to that, not burning organic waste, like using it when you prune and cut trees, just putting in a pile, leave it there for a year or two, and then come back and you'll see that that has turned into soil or turned into some sort of a bono or compost that can be used in other parts of your land. Something that I saw that I guess is one of the hardest parts for me emotionally of working inside, like close to the beach, is we work in a watershed in Juluchuca. It kind of like moves up to the Sierras, and we live along the highway in Juluchuca and we don't have trash service. The only thing people know is to burn their trash. And so as you get higher up into the Sierras or the mountains, people unfortunately know that the river will carry the trash down and not leave it in their yards or on their fields. And so that's the trash service of the mountain communities. So by the time that river washes down to Juluchuca, it kind of breaks through the sandbar and the lagoon. We see that trash on our beach, on the public beach. Well, it's all a public beach in Mexico, but like on the part of the beach that the community uses, on the part of the beach that our guests use. But again, the problem is a solution. And so our guests are encouraged to carry a bag with them when they go to the beach and pick up trash. We work as a social and environmental impact team at Playa Viva. We work in the schools. We pay a teacher full time to do environmental and emotional education, starting really young. Something I've seen over the years is that adults and parents really grasp onto concepts when their children come home and kind of question, why aren't we doing this? Or I learned this in school. Can we do this, mom and dad? And that's how kind of through the children, we're able to have really important conversations with adults and slowly see changes. And then, there's something I've learned, and this is kind of directly to you guys, Lex and Alana, and those of you on the call. Like, there's a community outside of agriculture that I hadn't really been exposed to. I'm not water based. I'm not a surfer, as you've seen. But there's a community of you guys that are, and whether that's in California or on the coast of Mexico, a lot of you guys see the impacts of what's happening on the land and how that kind of transcends that fluid barrier into the ocean. And so one of the things that I've enjoyed most over the last couple of months is getting to know a new group of like thought leaders and experts in their field and thinking through ways that we can collaborate together, how we can expand the watershed that Playa Viva has been focused on over the past 15 years to a little bit longer of a corridor along the coast of Guerrero. And so things that used to be challenges and used to feel daunting are now opportunities to connect and collaborate and get creative with new folks.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That was such a great answer to that question. And as a surfer who is of that mindset of how I can lead my community towards stewardship of our oceans, I'm super excited for more collaborations with you through Sea and Soil and then stewardship. So thank you for such a great answer.
Thanks for a good question.
Awesome. Amanda, we have a few more coming in. One that I'm really excited to ask you is from Kate Luna. Thanks, Kate. She's really curious and would love to be a part of something like this. And thank you so much for sharing your story. And she would love to know how one would go about getting involved.
Cool. Good question. I'm glad you're feeling inspired, Kate, and interested in getting involved. If you're asking specifically about Juluchuca and Playa Viva, we have a volunteer program. That's something, it's a 3-month minimum. I really highly recommend folks to come and spend 6 months in town. It takes a little while to get to know people, to understand the dialect, to understand the movement of elements and people, and the relationships between the hotel and the town. There are also, I mean, there are ways. I'm an educator really at heart, and so there's a lot of ways to like bring down school groups, I guess, when the world allows movement of large groups of people again, but there'd be ways to collaborate on that front. If you're more of an academic and interested in doing master's degree work or PhD work, I haven't even gotten into some of the bigger ecological projects that we're doing, but we do a lot of watershed management through mangrove restoration, estuary, like reestablishing estuaries, fisheries, and yeah, so there's, as well as agroforestry and some of the reforestation work that I'm more highly focused on. So there's a lot of ways that you could come down and support an academic career. You could support a professional career. There's a really, really cool program. I actually got off the phone with them today called 109 World. They've come down 2 years in the past. I think you pay for a trip with them, but then you come as a Playa Viva guest. It's a 5-day like retreat, but it's 4 working hours every morning. This year they're coming down they'll be down in December. They will be building an education center on our farm using bamboo and palapa, which is a big palm frond, and some natural building techniques using local clay and sand and horse manure. But yeah, a real opportunity to get your hands involved, get your hands dirty, do some work side by side with us, get to know our community. With any luck, get to know the folks in La Saladita and some of the work that they're doing, and see if there's ways that we can connect and collaborate in that sense. I know between Playa Viva and La Saladita, we are both, these 2 permaculture projects that are kind of running side by side are really looking to help local farmers.
Send it to you. There's nothing written on it. It'd just be Amanda talking.
If kind of trying to help people get access to market. So if that is a skill set or an expertise that you have, that's another way to get involved, to kind of bring your resources and stuff to the table and think through ways that we can collaborate. I know we've mentioned the GoFundMe and some of that stuff. If you're looking just to contribute financially, those resources are always appreciated and can go a long way. And then ideally, if you want to move around and travel, maybe come as a guest to Playa Viva in the future, you can always kind of come down and see where that money or where that contribution went and the impact that it made in the community.
It's incredible, Amanda. Awesome. And then also the GoFundMe, which we shared previously, but we'll dose out all those links at the end as well for the rainwater catchment. Thank you, Leah. She's so on it. Nick, we're going to come to your question in a moment because I'm super curious about the pandemic's effect, but I'd love to invite Sarah Servin to ask her question to you, Amanda.
Hi, Amanda. Thanks so much for sharing your story. It's always so good to hear what's going on in your life and be inspired by you continuously. I'm curious, just during your observation time period when you were first getting to Mexico and getting to know the community and kind of learning from the land and from the people there, just kind of if I guess there is still ancestral knowledge around some of these land-based systems and what type of things you were able to learn from the people in the land during that observation period.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the question. Thanks for being on here. Yeah, Sarah does a lot of work in indigenous communities, and she is Mexican, so she's very informed of kind of what opportunities present themselves inside Juluchuca that you don't always see as a foreigner coming into a new space. I allude to some of these thoughts in the blog post if you guys get a chance to read that. But you know, most people are probably familiar with the Three Sisters technique of farming, kind of this beans, squash, corn. Something that was really interesting to me to see in Juluchuca and in the agrarian community around us is that a lot of people still farm using that planting scheme, that system. And it was really interesting to me. It's something that I've studied. I understand theoretically. I had never actually seen successful in the field. And so getting to know that folks do that and knowing how to ask the right questions to learn, like if they understood why those things were still being planted together. It was quite surprising to me that people did. They knew that the beans need to be reincorporated into the soil to build soil. And there was a really funny story of how one guy didn't want to grow beans. He just didn't need them that season. So he wasn't growing them, but they kind of had a bet with his grandfather that his corn would grow better. And the grandfather was like, you're missing a major component of the corn's growth if you don't have the beans. Something I've learned in Juluchuca is that people really learn by seeing the process and the results. And so when it came time to harvest and they compared their corn, he was 18 at the time. The man's now 40 years old and he has not grown corn without beans since. He was like, the system proved itself right. Another thing that's really beautiful for me to see is that folks where I live are still very connected to plant medicine. They use remedies that are a mixture of different herbs. They use it everywhere from like poultice, like on top of the skin, to ingesting herbs. If you're sick, whether it's me as a foreigner or somebody locally, the answer is always a plant medicine. It's go to Doña Elvia's house, get this plant at this time of the day, consume it for this many days. And if you don't feel better, then go to Don Juan's house and get this other plant. And it's not until like 40 days of being sick that they would recommend that you go to a doctor. That's kind of generational, but again, it's an opportunity to take some of that knowledge, to offer value to that knowledge, to use it both on the farm and like inside the conversations that I have, to try to invigorate it again in the younger generation. Specifically with plant medicine, we are building it's also in the article, I believe, or in one of the posts that Leah mentions. We have like a labyrinth being built on the farm that is using cuttings from each one of these grandmothers, inviting them to the farm to plant it with us, to teach our farm team. Even if we all think we know how to do it, it's a great opportunity to connect with them and to show kind of this older generation that your knowledge is not, there's some of us that don't want to forget it. Like, we want to hold on to this. And so we're trying to give honor to that by planting those plants on our farm and having it be like a very interactive space where you move through it kind of like the human body. It's like, oh, I have headache ailments, or I have head problems. I'm consuming from this part of the garden. Yeah, I think those kind of are two of the biggest things that we've seen.
Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
Love it. That was an amazing question, Sarah. I'd love to, if you happened on Mighty Networks, I'd love to hear more about your work too, because from what Amanda said, it sounds really fascinating. Awesome. So I think we have time for one more question. So coming from Nick, super inspired by your story, Amanda, and he's curious how the pandemic has affected the community in Juluchuca, as well as regenerative tourism and the projects that it helps support.
Thanks for the question, Nick. So in Juluchuca specifically, there are two major economies. It's kind of like the head of like all coconut candy production in the country. And so a good amount of people work at a coconut factory. 10 to 15% of the population of Juluchuca work inside Playa Viva. So when the pandemic hit and Playa Viva decided to close the hotel, a few months earlier than we normally do for the rainy season. Those people lost their jobs, and it was not easy to do. It was a very tough decision for us on the side of management. It was also a very tough reality to live every day inside Juluchuca, side by side, kind of as with those community members as my neighbors, and realize that they didn't have a job and they don't have really many other options. In our town, if you can travel to Zihuatanejo, which is about 45 minutes north, where there's also kind of a tourism industry. That too was shut down. A large percent of the working men also migrate seasonally to the United States to do agriculture work in Southern California and Oregon and that region. A lot of them did not leave. And a lot of them still chose to leave because it was the only income that they would be able to offer their family, which was a really hard experience for me to observe, kind of knowing that these folks who don't have access to hospitals and healthcare once they come home, nor as migrant workers inside the United States, were going essentially to be frontline workers and continue producing food for a community of us who live in the US, food and nutrients that weren't even making it back to the lands that they left, and they were going and working without face masks and under harsh conditions, around chemicals, and just really in at-risk areas. So I think those are kind of some of the biggest realities to date. Since the pandemic, the hotel has reopened. We're accepting national guests. We don't accept too many international guests right now. So that's allowed, and really that decision was based in what risk are we willing to take in light of a global pandemic to help support the 40 to 45 people seasonally that work at our hotel, and just kind of like what's a bigger risk, not opening and not having income for these folks, or opening and doing the best we can to protect one another and protect them and offer a little bit of like economic stimulation. We didn't make that decision as individuals on a management team, kind of foreigners who run a hotel in this community. We brought the stakeholders in our community to the table. There's liaisons, kind of self-appointed government folks in each town. We brought the leaders of each of our departments and kind of asked them, like, what do you need? What do you want to see? What steps do we need to take? And is this an environment you want to work in, or is it something that you can work in? What's more important to you, that we open or we don't open? And we took their advice and we moved slowly. So far, there's not a case of the pandemic where we live. The nearest one is probably 50 or 60 miles away. So we're, just kind of maintaining as close to normalcy as we can. I think kind of long-term there is the pandemic, from what I understand, has really helped people connect to the land in a different way and maybe come back to like a more full circle lifestyle, kind of know farmers, know the importance of baking bread at home, or whatever the case might be, putting in our own gardens. And so I think as far as tourism goes, and tourism in general, there's an opportunity for businesses like Playa Viva or for other businesses to take some initiative and take some really important steps and be leaders in tourism. If you're a guest at Playa Viva, you can teach yoga in the community. You can invite a second grade class to come do yoga at the hotel with you. You're allowed to come work on the farm and sit with the piglets and really live the experience and get to know a sense of place in a much different way than you would in a different type of travel. And so I'd like to see Juluchuca, Playa Viva, the projects that are building in La Saladita, a small kind of hotel or restaurant opening up called Mareta, these folks leading the way on the coast of Guerrero and really helping regenerative agriculture, regenerative travel make its mark inside Mexico and kind of influence the next decade or a couple decades going on.
Amazing. Amanda, that's so beautiful and really speaks, I think, to your time in Costa Rica too. I think they've really dialed in some of that regenerative, eco-conscious travel, the formula there. So it's really just so beautiful to see you scaling it in Mexico and making it a reality. I just want to give you the hugest thanks and also the opportunity for Leah to jump in if she wants, but we trust and know and honor that you could be anywhere in the world today and you chose here to be with us for this hour. And I think it's had a huge impact on me. And look at all of these amazing, beautiful, friendly faces on this call. I feel so inspired by your work. And until I can come visit Playa Viva in person, I always end these sessions and I love that you have something immediately that if someone feels really inspired by what you're doing, they know that they can just go donate to the rain catchment program or to Playa Viva directly and make an impact in the communities that now I feel like I understand so much more about, especially in this crazy time in the world, how the work you're doing is directly and very powerfully impacting just lives, 10% of this community's well-being and ability to create income for themselves. So thank you. Huge thanks for doing the work that you're doing and also for being here with us today. Leah, I don't know if you have anything that she's good. All right, cool. I'm gonna drop one more, just if you want to follow along with Amanda's work at Playa Viva on Instagram. Her personal and Playa Viva's Instagram is there. And if you guys have additional questions, hit us up in Mighty Networks. I'm going to be posting all the links to the session. The replay will be up later today. And we can live it again. Amanda, do you have any final thoughts for us? You inspiration of a woman. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Thanks everyone for participating. I recognize a lot of your faces. I appreciate you all. And I really hope to get to know those faces that I don't know. Reach out. I'm super available on all social media or by email. I'd love to support the projects that you're doing and think of ways that we can collaborate and really see a more regenerative, a green future and something that really connects communities and kind of breaks through barriers.
Awesome. Amanda, what's your email?
It's probably best at amandaharris@playaviva.com.
Cool. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to wrap. Thank you so much for coming today. Appreciate you, Amanda. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.